The worst thing, the worst thing is when they accuse me.
Yeah.
Believe me, that's good when you're older.
Oh, I know. I met a lady yesterday that was 54, and she looked like she was 40. And I'm like, you look great for your age. Is that what I have to look forward to?
That's my mom. There's a belief that
That's you too. You look young too. You probably are young, but
I'm 45. I'll be 46.
I was gonna say 40.
My mom is 76, I think now, and I swear she looks like she's in her 40s or 50s. She's just amazing.
Awesome.
Pass some of that to all of us.
You know. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. I just kind of want to give you why there's this notion of death. So let's just use a basic Judeo-Christian belief system for a moment. What's the belief in religion, in just a Judeo-Christian belief about why we die? Why are we given this body and why are we dying?
To serve.
Okay, but let's go back to just Christianity for a moment. What's the whole Adam and Eve story?
Oh, yeah, that we're liars because a woman ate the apple.
Okay. So Eve ate the apple, and what happened?
And she made a pact, I guess, by eating the apple with the serpent.
Okay.
From the serpent.
And then what was the result?
We were cursed, I guess.
We were thrown out of?
Heaven.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
The
The Garden of Eden. Okay. So that idea of we were thrown out of the Garden of Eden was taken literal. And so there's a belief that there was an Adam, that there was an Eve, that there was a serpent, that there was an apple, and that happened. And that all of a sudden, they felt guilty about prancing around naked. Oh my God, we're naked. And now we're kicked out of heaven, okay? Not true. This is what really happened. This is the cosmic consciousness. This is wholeness. Okay? This is the universal energy. This is what we would consider heaven. What happens in the cosmic consciousness? What happens in wholeness? What happens in heaven?
We're created.
Okay, and we're perfect. We're intact. So you guys remember my story of the puzzle and the puzzle maker?
I think so.
Okay.
But please refresh.
So in the Kabbalah, there is a story of the puzzle and the puzzle maker. And this puzzle maker represents God. And he has a little workshop, and every day he makes a puzzle. And the kids come up to his little workshop every day, knock on his door, and they say, puzzle maker, what's the puzzle for the day? And he opens the door and he gives them the puzzles, and the kids spend the whole day putting the puzzles together. And they're so happy, and the next day they get a new puzzle and a new puzzle. And one day the puzzle maker makes this amazing creation. And he's like, this is the most amazing creation I've ever made. AKA you, me. And he says, I'm not going to make this into a puzzle. And when the kids come, I'm just going to give it to them intact. So the kids knock, and they say, puzzle maker, where's the puzzle? And he goes, here. It's so perfect. I didn't want to make it into a puzzle. I'm just going to give it to you perfect. And the kid's like, well, what fun is that? And anyone see the metaphor in that story? What does that mean? What fun is it if you are already perfect?
Yeah.
It's not living.
It's not living. And if you don't have life, you don't have death. These two go together. Life and death are one. In order to have death, you must have life. In order to have life, you must have death. So when the puzzle maker ceases to give them a puzzle, and he gives them this perfect whole picture, the kids are like, boring. So the puzzle maker, aka God, says, I'm going to give you your puzzle into all these little pieces. And your job in this life is to go through life, and at 28 find your father, and at 6, you know, take your son to buy him a bicycle, and at 30 have a seizure, and at 20 graduate as the most, you know, famous PsyD ever, and me at every year have something, and you know, and pick up the pieces of your life and create your own puzzle. Because that is life, that is living. That's the idea. So if it were perfect, it would be too boring. And because we are creatures that want pain and suffering, like the gentleman in the video mentioned, we decide to break off, and I call this the cosmic egg that breaks. And I have an image here. It's not the exact slide for this, but you see it's the perfect egg that has the crack. And every single one of us is like a perfect egg that has a crack in it. Now, I have a book, but it's downstairs, and I've shown this to you guys before. So I'm very much about mythology and these stories. And in every creation story, there's something that's broken. There's something that cracks, whether it's an egg that cracks open or there's someone that got kicked out of heaven. Something's got to be broken. Why?
To have a story.
In order to have a story, in order to have to fix it. If not, what would be your purpose throughout life?
Can't explain nothing.
If it ain't broke, you don't fix it. So you need to have something to explain and something to tell your grandkids and something to go through life to do. Okay? So you need this broken cosmic egg. And here you have the masculine, and here you have the feminine. And we are broken up into these two parts. Every single one of us has a masculine part or a feminine part, the yin-yang. Right? Are you familiar with the yin-yang? That's as good as it's getting.
Darkness. Complete
Darkness.
There is no balance.
There is none in my world. That's as good as you're getting. Okay. Then the egg and the sperm, mom and dad, get together and they have baby. But mom and dad are already screwed up. Okay?
Yep.
They have you and you're screwed up. And then in comes the subconscious. So, where does death really begin?
At conception.
At conception. Death begins here. So birth, the subconscious, is where death begins. At the minute that you're kicked out of this cosmic consciousness, at the minute that your cosmic egg, because this is conception, is broken, the minute your subconscious develops, that you're split into masculine and feminine, death begins here. And then all of this just follows in line. So really, at the moment of conception, we are already dying. These are symbols that represent death in various forms. Who is this? This is Jesus. Why does Jesus represent death?
Because he died
He
died for us.
Okay, so he died for us, and what else did he die?
What else died? No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Okay, well, no, you're absolutely right. What's the story of Jesus?
That he came to earth. Yeah.
The third day.
What is the symbolic representation of the third day?
Right.
He was born again, basically? Or no?
Being born again.
Absolutely. Okay,
The birth?
so now
I know the basics.
go to your chart
She's no more than me.
and find Pluto. Pluto is your planet of death and rebirth. Death and rebirth. Wherever you have a death, you have a rebirth. Every single thing that dies must be reborn. Jesus is not alone. He is simply a metaphor, a story, a myth, a symbol for death and dying. So the gentleman in the TED Talk, where was his death?
When he was shot.
When he went up in college, up to the electrocuted, and he
Yeah.
lost his limbs. And what was his rebirth? What was his 3 days?
When
The snow?
Well, when he was in palliative care, and then I guess when he became the doctor to now heal other people. So he died, and from his death, we're talking figuratively, we're not talking physically, okay? There's two types of death. We have physical death, and we have figurative death. He died and he rebirthed, so then he can then heal other people. And this is the importance of death in your life. If you want to know the purpose of your life, find out your death. What is your death? What is it that you need to learn in your death processes? And that is going to tell you why you are here. That's going to tell you what you came to rebirth, what you came to help and serve. Nicole, I think you said serve earlier. What you came to do and serve with others. So Jesus is a metaphor for the death rebirth process. He died on the cross for our sins, and after 3 days, he was resurrected. But was he resurrected as a human being?
No.
No, he was resurrected as a spirit. What is the importance of stories like Jesus?
There's always a second chance. There's always a chance for a new beginning.
Okay, in this world,
Yeah, I mean, you can figuratively.
okay, so figuratively, yes,
And then come.
there's an opportunity for a new beginning, and you can redo it correctly, and that's absolutely right. That's going to be more Saturn. So this 28-year cycle, which I'll get to in a minute,
Has to be 28.
get to do it over again. So we're always getting, it's actually 7, and I'll explain to you why. It's 7. You were saying something?
Physically we die, but just the spirit never dies, basically.
Okay, and why do we need these stories? Why do we need to know the spirit never dies?
To have something to like hold on to
We need
like that
something.
there's something
Motivation.
further
Closure.
than just, yeah.
Closure, a motivation to continue going, to feel better if we lose someone. I lost my sister
Physically they're never gonna be there, but.
at a young age. What difference does it make if her spirit continues or not? She's dead, she's gone. She's never going to be in my room again.
But she's dead in flesh, not in spirit.
But in spirit, we say, we have these stories that Jesus very well represents because it gives us some hope. It gives us a story to hold on to that says, oh, they really haven't left. They've just changed the way in which they're with us. We don't know. ultimately, at the end of the day, we do not know.
I'm so like demonic with my mom because I asked her, I'm like, you're doing all of this, like you're going to church, you're, you know, bending over. And what if there isn't anything after death? Like, what if we just, like, I don't even know how to explain
What
it.
if
Like,
you just
what
turn
if-
into a turtle?
what if
I mean,
there
you don't.
is-
Yeah.
No,
I hope not.
no, I don't
So
like,
it's really longer.
the thing is that I tell her, what if there, like, God, you know, is, what if it's not God? Like, what if you're not forgiven? Like, oh, then, she's like, then you go to hell. And I'm like, yeah, but what if, like, there is no
Right,
heaven
what if
or
there's
hell?
no
Like,
heaven? What if
the-
there's no hell? We have no clue. These are all representations of stories that make us feel better.
The Bible's written by men, so.
And that's what I tell her too. I'm
Yeah.
like, how
Look.
do you do that?
I see clients from work, from home, and I have a lot of phone clients. On New Year's Day, first client of my year was one of my dearest clients whose brother committed suicide. That was the first client that I had this year. I mean, it was hard. I get a text at like 7 in the morning, Francis, I need you, are you awake? And I'm like, what do you need? And he's like, my brother committed suicide. And I was like, I'm here. And one of the things was, where'd he go? How's he doing? What's he up to? People want to make sure that their loved ones are okay. It's a really important thing that people know that their loved ones are okay. It's not an accident that these are all stories, some version of a resurrection. Let's look at it. You've got Jesus, which is extremely, obviously, the most common one. This is the myth of Inanna. I've shared this myth before.
The one that went down.
Inanna was the god of heaven, and she had a sister named Ereshagal. And her sister was the god of the underworld. So in all of these stories, there's someone that lives in the heavens and there's someone that lives in the underworld. Pluto is the god of the underworld. He's also known as Hades. So Ereshagal calls her up and says, my husband died. Come down here. So she's like, okay, so she gets ready, she gets dressed, and as she goes through the levels to go down to the underworld, every time she goes through one of the doors, they strip her of her clothing. There's a symbolism in that. Every time we get closer and closer to death and a rebirth process, our masks are removed. We're becoming more authentic. We're more raw. We're more vulnerable. By the time she gets down to the underworld, she's completely naked. And her sister opens the door and she goes, how dare you insult me? And she hangs her on a butcher's hook and she kills her. It turns out that Inanna is pregnant. What's the symbolism there?
For the,
Death and rebirth. From her death, she is reborn. And there's nothing more authentic than a child, than a baby. So from the flesh, from the masks, from all of the layerings, all of the coverings that we wear to protect ourselves, this child is born. So that's a very old Sumerian myth. What's the story of Lazarus?
He was a very, was it wealthy or poor?
He always had his dogs, I forgot this story.
So he has his dogs. He was, I believe, the cousin of Jesus's cousin Mary or something like that. The specifics, personally, I'm not concerned with. But he died. And they called Jesus, on his cell phone. And they said, Jesus, Lazarus died. And he said, don't worry, I'll be there. And the days pass, and the days pass, and 4 days pass, and he doesn't show up. And by the time Jesus shows up, he's dead. And Jesus is like, not a problem. Lazarus, rise. And Lazarus rose from the dead. So Jesus, it was a miracle. He rose Lazarus from the dead. There's a lesson there of humility. There's a lesson there of loyalty. There's a lesson there that even if you're dead, Jesus can rise you from the, get you from the dead. And it goes back to these sort of symbolisms of even if you're dead, so to speak, in figuratively, that you can rise from that. It's the concept of the phoenix. From the ashes you will rise. Okay? St. Francis of Assisi. Anyone know St. Francis of Assisi's story? Okay, St. Francis of Assisi went a little crazy, and he was, I don't know if it was a coma or what, he was out of it for several days or weeks, and when he woke up, he saw a little bird, and apparently the birdie whispered in his ear, and that he had to live his life and give it over to God. And his parents were very wealthy. His parents were like one of these wealthy people from the town. And he told his parents, no, 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 you have to give up all of your belongings and you have to give your life to God. And his parents said, hell no. And he did. And from that moment, he turned his life over to God, and he said he was going to build a temple. And he found all of these rocks, this temple that was broken down, and he heard a voice, and he's like, build the temple. And he started building it barefoot in the snow. There's a great movie I highly recommend. Brother, Sun, Sister Moon, I think is what it's called. And it's a story of his life, and it's really good. And he's in the snow, it's freezing cold, and he's building the temple by his hands, one by one. And finally, people start to help him. Towards the end, they start helping him, and he does end up building the temple again, and that's where they start the Franciscan order. This is a lot of where you get this idea that in order to die, you have to give something up. If you've ever done a pilgrimage, or you've ever seen people do a pilgrimage, it's always about giving something up. If God, you do this for me, this idea of bargaining, when we do the stages of grief next time, this idea of bargaining is, if God, you do this for me, I will X, Y, Z. And oftentimes, it's a pilgrimage, or I will give something up, meaning the pleasures of the flesh. Because if we come from wholeness, and it's the flesh, like in Adam and Eve, that is the evil, the temptation, like in Francis of Assisi, give up the flesh, give up the pleasures of the flesh, then it must be that if I give up something pleasurable, that therefore I am a better person. Therefore, this death is not in vain. So one of the things you're going to find in psychology, and I actually had a friend/client this morning. So this is a person whose mother was very punishing. And her mother let her have nothing. Her mother owned her. Never let her have anything of her own, like anything. It was amazing that she could get married and have children. This is how possessive her mother was. And she ended up dying about 2 years ago. And what happens when someone is your perpetrator? What happens when someone abuses you for so long? Who continues that abuse?
You do. You get accustomed to it.
Absolutely. And so either you find somebody to continue perpetrating a Pluto in your life, someone who will continue giving you, that pain, or you do it and inflict it on yourself. So we were talking this morning and she was crying. She's like in a really bad emotional state. And she just moved. And this was her dream. Her dream was to live on a certain part of Miami. And finally, her mother passes away. Her children are both married and off. And she's finally financially stable enough that she can afford to live in this part of Miami. Well, she gets there, and there's a problem with the homeowners. And she's crying and crying and crying. She hasn't been able to go to work for 2 days. And I said to her, do you not see that you're simply continuing the perpetrator? Now that your mother has passed, you've just continued being your own abuser. And she's like, that's so screwed up. And I'm like, no, that's the way it works. And that is what we do with this idea of the flesh. I must be a bad person if I have pleasures of the flesh. I must deserve this death in whatever metaphorical sense it is, this evil, because I did so and so. And this is the indoctrination that we have from the moment of conception. And that's why at the moment of conception is when death begins. And all we do is have a series of deaths throughout our life, over and over and over again, to prove these thoughts correct. So all she did was take the thought that her mother owned her, that her mother was her abuser, that her mother had to take everything from her, and said, oh, well, my mom's not here anymore. Let me continue and perpetuate that thought. And now she's punishing herself, and she's emotionally ill and making herself physically ill, so that she, in essence, will probably move away, move out of that, or be so sick that she can never enjoy the place in which she decided to move. That has been her dream her whole life. So we are our own perpetrators because we want to continue perpetuating a belief that we don't deserve. And so the St. Francis of Assisi theme, which we see throughout religion over and over and over again, is if we remove pleasures of the flesh, if I punish myself and don't have, and you live with her.
I'll tell you. No, I'll tell you.
Tell us.
We
I love hearing about your mom.
We were speaking because I came back from the gynecologist, and I told her how there were options for me no longer having kids, and one of them was to cut my fallopian tubes. And even before that, like, she had told me, don't, the Bible says, and I did wrong in cutting mine, and
the Bible says this?
Yeah, the Bible says that you're supposed to be pure or whatever, and like never, because that's wrong to not be able
well,
to
you
give
already
birth.
screwed that up with all your piercing and tattoos, so
So-
forget the fallopian tubes. Next!
So I came home and I told her about, I'm thinking of doing this, or also inserting the IUD. What? This bitch went off on me. She was like, you better not. Instead of freaking around with random guys, you just need to hold yourself, and no, don't do that. Wait for a husband. And I'm just like, at first, like, I'm thinking about it because I feel like she sets things on me to make me feel bad about it. So therefore, I'm like, maybe I shouldn't do it. But I'm a grown-ass woman. Like, I'm 30. I don't want any more kids. So, and because I have my kidney problems, the IUD is kind of like a so-so because it supposedly gives a lot of urinary tract infections. It's not the safest. So I'm thinking of maybe going with cutting them and possibly telling her after the fact. because she's just gonna flip. Like, if she flipped just me telling her that I was thinking of doing it, and she's like, you just need to wait for the right man to come into your life and be married instead of, you know, having one guy today and one guy tomorrow. I was like, listen, that's my life of how many guys I have in my life, and I will do what I have to do. And she's just like, you're setting a bad example for your son. Listen, I have not had sex in a